Hello and good evening. My name is Cathy Gelbin, and on behalf of Manchester University's Centre for Jewish Studies, I wish you a very warm welcome to this year's Bogdanow Lectures on Holocaust Studies. It is with great pleasure that we welcome today the Academy Award, Grand Prix, Golden Globe, and BAFTA-winning director, László Nemes, as this year's Bogdanow Lecture on Holocaust Studies. And we are equally honored and extremely delighted that the Chancellor of Manchester University and BAFTA-nominated poet Lem Sasay will be delivering the opening address for our event tonight. László Nemes's visit, virtual due to circumstance, is hosted by the Centre for Jewish Studies at Manchester University, which is one of originally 3, now 7 European centres of excellence in Jewish studies. The Centre organizes public events such as the Bogdanow Lectures on the Holocaust and the Sherman Conversations on topics such as Jewish studies and gender studies. The Centre also hosts a series of interfaith discussions under the title Scriptural Encounters. Its website also charts the progress of an ongoing program of events in which contemporary artists produce art in response to 50 selected Jewish objects held at UK universities. The research pursued by members of the Centre for Jewish Studies at Manchester includes the study of human remains from events of genocide and the documentation of economic theft and art theft as part of the Holocaust. It also tells the story of Jewish responses to atheism and evolution and creates public databases on Jewish narrative and law after the Bible, as well as digitalizations of Hebrew manuscripts. Members of the Centre analyze Jewish-Arab identities in countries of the modern Middle East and study the configuration of the Jew through European notions of cosmopolitanism. After this brief introduction to our Centre for Jewish Studies, I am delighted to now hand over to the Chancellor of Manchester University and poet Lem Sasay for his opening address.
I welcome you to the 2021 Bogdanow Holocaust Lecture at Manchester University's Centre for Jewish Studies. This event, enabled by the bequest of a Holocaust survivor, the late Manchester professor Fanny Bogdanow, takes place every year close to Holocaust Memorial Day, the day on which Soviet troops liberated the extermination camp Auschwitz in 1945. Holocaust Memorial Day is on 27th of January, and thus most commemorative events took place 2 weeks ago. But today's event is not coming too late to be relevant, for the right day for remembering what happened in the Holocaust is regrettably every day, including tonight and also tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, for as long as events take place or threaten to take place, which are of the same ilk as the Holocaust. Remembering it is relevant. And so, sadly, tonight and tomorrow are also Holocaust Memorial Days. We live in a world in which racism, arising from surprising and unsurprising corners of our societies, happens every day. That's the reason why it is still necessary to say that Black Lives Matter and that the memories of transatlantic slavery, colonial genocide, and the Holocaust can stand side by side in their own specificity. And that's also the reason to say that in certain circumstances, genocide can arise from the small, everyday hatred of the other. This is part of the message of tonight's event, which discusses how the cinematic arts, including those in the work of László Nemes, have responded and may respond to the awareness of the genocide of Jewish people and other genocides. The Centre for Jewish Studies at University of Manchester hosts tonight's event as part of its annual Bogdanow Holocaust Lectures. It's a centre not primarily dedicated to combating anti-Semitism and racism. It was founded to promote academic knowledge and understanding of Jewish cultures, language, and history. But already, by being concerned with this, the centre also combats anti-Jewish prejudice and racism. And so does every piece of knowledge and understanding that arises from genuine academic research and teaching combat prejudice and racism. Knowledge and understanding arising from empathy are one foundation of combating genocide and other mass atrocities. And so it is fitting that today's event takes place in the context of a university, this particular one, ours, the University of Manchester, and its Centre for Jewish Studies. This annual public lecture series has been made possible as a result of a generous bequest to the university by Fanny Bogdanow, a former professor of French and medieval studies at Manchester, and a child refugee on the Kinder transport. Fanny Bogdanow passed away in 2013 and gave all her estate to the University of Manchester. She made very clear in her will that part of that money should be dedicated to a lecture series on the Holocaust for Holocaust Memorial Day. All her life, Fanny Bogdanow remembered her difficult childhood in Nazi Germany, the isolation Jewish people had to live with, the pogrom of Kristallnacht, and her flight as a child refugee without her beloved parents to Manchester. I am extremely delighted to welcome here today the Oscar Grand Prix, Golden Globe and BAFTA winning film director László Nemes as this year's Bogdanow Lecturer. Following previous Bogdanow Lecturers such as Christopher Browning and Vicky Barnett, who are leading historians in Holocaust studies, László Nemes is a globally acclaimed filmmaker who, in his multi-award-winning film, The Son of Saul, has grappled with the philosophical and practical issues of artistic Holocaust representation. Holocaust art, and film in particular, has been a highly contested terrain in the wake of the philosopher Theodor Adorno's severe statement that to make poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. And the documentary filmmaker Claude Lanzmann's equally somber statements that the Holocaust surrounds itself with a circle of flames which must not be violated because a certain absolute extent of horror cannot be mediated. And yet, Adorno had been equally adamant that art cannot stay silent in the face of atrocity because it would otherwise be complicit with the perpetrators. Art must bear witness to the victims and the grave injustice they suffered. Nothing more and nothing less than that. There lies no solace in this past, even though we, as the living, must have hope for change. And speaking of hope for change, László Nemes, we look forward to being in conversation with you today.
Many thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Len.
For opening words and for introducing us to our guest tonight, László Nemes. I have some housekeeping announcements before we start about the Q&A. So we would like to invite all members of the audience to raise your questions throughout the event, starting from now, really. And to do that, please open the Q&A window. Type your question into the Q&A box and click send, and this will allow you to send your question directly to the panelists. We will answer these questions in the second part of the event and hope that in this way we can address as many questions as possible. So as we said, you can start sending your questions now, please. And László, let me start by saying once again how wonderful it is to have you here tonight and how honored we are by your visit. Maybe to say a few words about you. You were born and spent your early years in late socialist era Budapest before your family moved to Paris, where you reportedly started making amateur films in the basement of your home. You later trained in filmmaking at the New York Tisch School of the Arts and are now based, I understand, mostly in Europe, while also normally traveling a great deal. And Son of Saul was your first major film, and you created it as an independent filmmaker. And one thing I'm always wondered about was what artistic opportunities independent filmmaking offered to you in making this astounding, truly astounding film.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I extend my thanks to the university and to the program, and it's an honor to speak with you tonight. I understand it's a prestigious series of lectures over the years, and so I'm thankful for being able to participate. As for and thanks, Len, for the introduction and your kind words. Starting as a filmmaker is always, I guess, a tricky thing, because this is the most one of the most difficult path in a way in I think in a modern era, because you don't really have to know anything, and yet you still have to know some things. And the trick is, when you go to film school, is that they tell you that you have to know, you have to know some things about filmmaking, but it's more about a relationship to life and to what you are in the world as a person, and so it's rather a path to find yourself in the process, and to find if you have a voice that should be expressed. That's a long path, and even in the process, you're as an individual, you cannot be sure that it's actually something that people are interested in. And maybe people would have been interested in 200 years ago. Maybe people would be interested in 50 years from now, but maybe people are not interested in you in the present. So it's always a tricky thing, And what I did know is that, I've I guess from my childhood, I was very interested in history, and I was interested in the Holocaust, and in all the traumas that in retrospect my family was a victim of, in a way, and that part, in that sense, that was a sort of a discovery of some kind of inner voice, almost the voice of people that cannot talk. And I think it was a very particular approach to filmmaking, because I was interested in filmmaking, but I was also interested in history. So, and it was very personal. So in a way, everything became one with my first movie, I guess. The voice, the questions, the path, in a broad sense. So obviously I can talk about my early years, and when I was 13, I made movies in my basement, but maybe it's not that relevant, or maybe it's only partially relevant, I would say.
I think growing up in continental Europe, I think the past there, the Nazi past and the crimes, have a particular ubiquitousness and rawness that members of the second and the third generation often find very hard to escape. And I imagine that it could be even more difficult with this overpowering weight of the past, especially if there's a personal connection to it, to then find artistic expression for something that at the same time is so intensely personal. And to make Son of Saul, I think you went back to Budapest to make it there, and you worked with a cast of relatively unknown, at least unknown to global film audiences, and a number of non-professional actors, including the poet and private school teacher Gesa Röhrig, who took the lead role of Saul, who I understand you had already met in New York. And how did you find funding and artistic collaborators?
Well, I did grow up in Paris, and at that time, I wanted to make this film in Paris, in France. Hungarian film funding at that time was a little bit problematic, especially for it was just financing issues behind it. What I wanted is a film that would be a European film, possibly a co-production, talking about basically it was a very simple premise, is talk about one day at the heart of the extermination, meaning the plight of one person in the crematoria, one of the crematoria of Auschwitz. And this story came to me when I was an assistant director, and I bought a book on the Sonderkommandos and the Sonderkommando. I did study history, and I had come in contact with a lot of documents, and I had seen Shoah, and I had a sort of background, if you will, in the extermination, in the studying of the extermination of the European Jews, and I did know things about that, but I didn't know much about the Sonderkommandos, and that seemed to me extremely. The knowledge of it was extremely limited, and it seemed that when I was reading through the text of these members of the Sonderkommandos, and people, I think, know that the Sonderkommandos were isolated from the rest of the camps, and kept in secret in a way, and they just had to assist in the machinery of extermination. And they were liquidated periodically. So how could they resist? They could resist by writing, which they did. They did write hundreds, possibly more documents that they put into the ground, and some of them were found after the war, and that these were the texts that I could read. And they could also organize armed resistance, and it was by the way, the only armed uprising in the history of Auschwitz, that was organized by the Sonderkommandos in 1944. So actually, the incredible text, the feeling that in a way we never try to represent or communicate in imagery what happened in the heart of the extermination. All these impulses gave rise to this project over the years, and it took some years to produce it. It took, and we had encountered incredible obstacles along the way, because it's easy to say that the Holocaust is a European historical fact, but it's another, and maybe it's also, easy to say that Europe would like to talk about it, or at least there must be a way to finance a film on that subject. But I can assure you that we encountered tremendous resistance in the European filmmaking community. Regarding the possibility of a co-production, regarding finding co-producers, and so on and so forth, in many countries, including Germany, including Austria, including France, obviously, not obviously, but in my case, it was really difficult, because, and that's, I think, the most interesting part, is that I really wanted to make a film that was different, and how would it be different? I knew that I wanted to make a film that wouldn't appeal to the easy feelings regarding the Holocaust, the crying, and I didn't want to make a film along the paradigm of survival that I thought was the sort of dogma of the post-war representation of the Holocaust. I wanted to, on the contrary, to create an experience, to throw the viewer into the here and now of the extermination without the possibility to stand on the side and put the brain in a very reassuring functioning mode, which is the external position. I wanted the viewer to be thrown into the middle of it, the middle of one person's perception in a very visceral way. And for that, I needed a directorial strategy, which I thought I found, that was really being really close to the main character and not revealing too much of the environment, because I thought that at that time that character was not looking anymore. It was not about looking. It was about existing in a different way. Maybe we can talk about it, but it was that very visceral limitation that we wanted to find a cinematic language for, and that was really the structure and the philosophy behind it. In the Holocaust, you don't have the time to think. You don't have the time to analyze. This comes if you survive after the war. But most of the time you don't survive, because survival was not the role, it was the exception. And yet all the films wanted to talk about survival. And if we wanted to talk about the dead, then how do you do it? And that was the problem with the financing, because they didn't want it to happen. And they didn't want, they meaning the European filmmaking community. And obviously they didn't want to give this possibility to the first-time filmmaker, which I can't really blame them for, but it was the case. So, in a nutshell, what the problems and the promise of the films were.
That's truly amazing to hear about the difficulties and the obstacles that you faced in getting the film supported so you could make it. And I think what really shines through in the film is the very personal, is the very subjective, is your determination to tell a story that, everybody who's written about Holocaust representation says cannot be represented, and to struggle against that incredible burden of the history on the one hand, and then the discourse, the debate about it on the other hand, and the whole canon of Holocaust film that exists already and that has created certain expectations in audiences when they go to watch a film like that, what they were going to see, and to want to disrupt that, I think is truly amazing. One thing that stands out to me as somebody who's worked on Holocaust representation for a long time is that your film seems to in some way respond to pick up on this huge debate about Holocaust representation in very astute ways. And I'm just wondering how conscious, how deliberate you were in doing that. 8 decades of artistic Holocaust representation and the scholarly debates from very early on. Lem has mentioned Adorno and his severe statement that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, and scholars arguing since then that there are or should be limits in artistic Holocaust representation. And your film seems to take on this immense historical and discursive burden with a knowing eye. And at the same time, it takes us into the epicenter of the destruction of European Jews in ways that feel visually really striking and completely unprecedented. And I find it incredibly brave that you took on this history of both the actual history, but also the history of the debate about what types of Holocaust representations are appropriate, and to what extent were you, I'm assuming that you are aware of these debates. To what extent did you find things in these debates that shaped your approach to the film, and to what extent did you decide to discard, for example, Claude Lanzmann's verdict of the Circle of Flames, which arguably you go far beyond?
Well, yeah, that's one central question, I guess. But I guess when you make a film, it has to be a central question to what is your relationship to the audience, and to what is the responsibility towards the audience. In the case of the especially in a world where imagery is so easy to make, and in a world that it seems the responsibility of imagery is dwindling, or at least it seems to be less and less important because people don't even think about it anymore. What is really important, I like to emphasize this, is in the case of a so-called Holocaust movie, which has become a subgenre of movies in a way, or historical movies or period movies. You have to be extremely careful. And my problem was that, and my whole team and my cinematographer, we did share this concern that the history of the representation of the Holocaust seemed to be seem to indicate that people are more and more, or at least have no problem making a movie about the Holocaust and using it for its so-called dramatic value. You put someone in the Holocaust, so it becomes immediately you raise the stakes immediately for the viewer in a very, very utilitarian way. And I thought that you couldn't touch so easily something that, if you know something about the extermination and the Holocaust, and I would argue that people actually know very little about the everyday life of the extermination, and how it showed what a civilized world of ours was capable of. If you know something about this, then you cannot you cannot use a sort of conventional imagery that wants to encapsulate the horror, or that wants to use evil as a sort of mega monster of representation, but never really find a cinematic and representational strategy to make it not understood but felt. It's or at least not visible but felt, or maybe so I give you an example. When you have when you have a representation of the camps, for example, you have usually in the so-called Holocaust movies, and that's what's something that really bothered me, is you put the camera, as a director, you have a tendency to put the camera to maximize the point of view, to maximize the visuals. And so you create postcards. You create postcards of the horror, but not only usually it's badly done, but also the problem is that you cannot, if you say that you will show the horror, you say to the audience, here's the horror, is you can control it, you can limit it. But I would argue that in Auschwitz or the Holocaust, you cannot limit the horror. You cannot digest the horror as in the movie. You have to you have to find something else. If you put the camera on top of the guard's tower, and you shoot a bird's eye view or an encompassing view of the camp, of parts of the camp, then you say, you see what the guard sees. It's actually the soldier's point of view. So you alternate between point of view of the victims and the point of view of the perpetrator, and you can switch between the point of views freely, and that creates also a sort of moral line, a moral connection between perpetrator and victim, which I find completely inexcusable, and it's actually makes it all relative. So I think jumping around with point of views, establishing very clear moral codes as to the camp. For example, you show the bad officer. You show, if you need to show the good officer, the good German, the good Nazi, and you show bad Nazis. In a way, you create a very safe pathway for the audience to navigate the Holocaust. And in this sense, you actually, I that's what I would argue, is you actually create a fake sense of certainty and a safe position for the audience, and I think you cannot show the Holocaust with this kind of position, because you give a sense of control and a sense of sort of a very safe judgmental position to the audience. And I think all the texts and all that I knew about the Holocaust pointed in one direction, is that in the subjective experience, and also in the collective experience, certainly, but in the subjective experience from the point of view of the victim, you are very limited, and you cannot just cut away from your experience. You cannot cut away to another person's experience, and you cannot create a world of right and wrong in this sense. And in a way, the Sonderkommandos, for example, were also where some people thought that or approached the question of the Sonderkommandos as sort of a gray area of responsibility, arguing that in a way they were also guilty of the Holocaust, which I think is not what I would argue. I think it's morally not defendable to say that the Sonderkommandos were in fact part of the extermination machine from moral standpoint. You have to one of the biggest crimes of the Nazis, apart from obviously from the Holocaust, is to create camps in which the victims had to reorganize in a way, right or wrong, or forget about right or wrong, and you can see it in a way in the post-Holocaust perception of this, and people started to blame each other in a way, and in a way forgetting the old, the real blame that has to be, I think, found, or at least reaffirmed, is why and how these camps were designed and constructed, and to what purpose, and that created obviously this whole experience. So all this, again, just to say that the representational issue was a very central one, and obviously we had to be very careful about what we were saying and how we would say it.
Thank you. I've got lots of other questions, but we also are starting to have questions coming through from the audience. One before I go into these, Lem, did you want to speak to László? I know you had some questions.
No, I would much prefer the audience to ask questions. I have a particular question, but I've seen the question the audience want to put, and I'd rather give over time to that, if that's okay.
Okay, yes, and I can hand back to you later on, maybe. So yeah, the first question I can see here, I'm just going to read it to you, László. Son of Saul is the most important film I have ever watched, but I hesitate to show it to friends as they seem never to want to watch a Holocaust film. How do I respond to this and to people generally not wishing to countenance the horrors of the Holocaust?
Wow, that's a difficult one. That's a tough one. I mean, well, thank you. Well, I have a little story to tell you. Maybe it will not answer the question, but at least it will be a good story to tell. Because I have a hard time answering it directly. When I was one of the first screening of the film after its premiere was in Toronto, and we had a Q&A session, and there were people in the audience who were older, and I could see that at the end they were, anxious and agitated. So they asked me a question. It seemed that one of them stood up and said that he was speaking for the others, for everybody, and it was an older gentleman, and he was kind of agitated, and he said that he's a survivor of the Holocaust, and he wants to know why I wanted to make a film about not the film based on a true story, but why did I have to make up this story? Whereas there were so many stories, true stories, real stories to tell, and I didn't know what to say really to this question, and it took me some months to formulate what I thought about that, and what I found out it was that saying that the story is true or real means that there was someone who actually told it, and just based on the numbers, we know that we can understand that most of the stories were not told. So most of the stories linked to the Holocaust were never told because the people who lived them could not tell them. And I think that's the biggest problem in a way when it comes to our representation and understanding of the Holocaust, is that we speak the language of survival because we have this instinct of survival. We speak the language of the paradigm of surviving, but the Holocaust is another story. It seems to me we can reassure ourselves that there were stories of survival, but I think it's only a psychological strategy to reassure ourselves, because that was not the rule. So in a way, I really have a hard time saying, what someone should tell their friends about this movie. I think that maybe if I would say that if you're in a really good mood, maybe that's a film to watch, because then you can be in a very bad mood after that. But possibly that would be an Eastern Europeans talking. So maybe you should just say that if you want to see one film that's actually in a way wants to go to the heart of the question, then if you're interested in that, then maybe that's the film of this. I mean, I was talking about fiction, because if there's one that's a documentary, you would go for Shoah by Lanzmann. But if you want to see a fiction, maybe that's the one you want to see.
It really does feel like Son of Saul is the Shoah of fiction.
We did use Shoah as a sort of visual reference when it came to colors, for example, and I know it's a documentary, and I know it's post-Holocaust in a way that it doesn't even use any kind of documentary archives, but it's still, we found it very, very, very powerful as a sort of film in itself.
Yes. The next question: how did you ensure integrity to your personal vision and the Jewish community whilst navigating the rigid structures and expectations of the film industry?
I want to be sure to understand this question.
Would you like me to repeat it?
I'm trying to read it. You know the name of the, okay. Can you repeat it, please? I don't answer something completely different.
Sure. How did you ensure integrity in your personal vision and the Jewish community whilst navigating the rigid structures and expectations of the film industry? I'll send it to you in the chat.
Well, I think as a filmmaker, what you do is you try to ask yourself the right questions, that at least in the process try to ask yourself all the questions that have to be asked. But as I said, I really grew up with the question of the Holocaust in a way, and even if I didn't know everything about it, I knew enough, and I felt that my approach to it was pure enough, in the sense that it was real and not concerned about the compromise to any kind of expectation, that it was coming from the need to say something about the personal experience. And these were the values that helped me, throughout the project. And it was really, in a way, nobody knew about this film when it was being made. Nobody cared, really. Even the Hungarians, nobody knew about it. And it was just a team effort by, a group of people who knew that, the right direction was where we were heading, or at least we tried to get there. And actually that's what guided us, and nothing else.
Thank you. The next question, I think you've responded to it, but I'll read it to you anyway, in case you want to add anything to what you've said. So the question is: was there a lot of opposition by the European film community about your decision to make the story about death and hopelessness, as opposed to the very American worldview of survival? Your film stands out in this sense as a statement against American positivity in interpreting and representing the Holocaust.
I guess we touched on that. I think usually the answer was, when I would send out the script, and the answer was, if we ever had an answer, was, oh, it's a great script, but there's no way we ever going to finance it, or okay, it's really good, but no. And you're not. We really wonder how you will be able to do this, to make this movie happen. So it's interesting because at least in the American system, it's based on profit, and I don't mind. At least it's profit. That they can say, okay, it's not going to make any profit, which is always a question. But at least it's clear. But in the European system, when it's supposed to be, to help protect some kind of cultural aspects and memory aspects of the Holocaust, to keep these kind of this kind of events in the consciousness of people. And you might argue that people in Europe would think that it's an important task and it's an important mission. Well, in that world, I encountered tremendous resistance. And I have to say, well, it's interesting because, because even after the release of the movie, there was a lot of resistance in some parts of Europe, especially Germany, not to name it, that was really interesting, to put it mildly. So in a way, it seemed that it worked. The paradigm to show a sort of feel-good story about a Holocaust, even if there are a lot of people dying, but at the end, because it's not only an American paradigm, it's a world paradigm, it's a European paradigm, and I would argue that has to be with a sense of guilt in Europe for sure. So this paradigm of survival is extremely strong in the European filmmaking or cultural community when it comes to this kind of film or a project like that. So instead of supporting it and giving the possibility to explore, when you know as a financier or as a producer that there's someone behind it or a group of people behind it who wants to say something meaningful and new, instead of this, they try to torpedo it. So I have no tremendous respect for this kind of attitude, especially when it comes from film funds and so on.
Lem, you actually had a question regarding the American side of the story.
It is a very simple question. Has Steven Spielberg been in contact?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Actually, it was very nice. It was after we had this circuit run, this award circuit thing at the just to be able to be present at the Oscars, and we had a very good American distributor, Sony Classics, and so we could feel that there was a lot of interest, and there was at some point a lunch. I think there was a nominees lunch, and Steven Spielberg came to me and he said that he congratulated me, and he actually thanked me, which was a for me the little kid who grew up on E.T. and on Indiana Jones I was very touched and extremely happy, obviously. But he said that interesting thing is he said that he thought after making Schindler's List that there would be more films about the collective memory of the Holocaust, and he thought that nothing was made until Son of Saul, and so he was really very warm and thankful, which was created a connection, and I also at some point I was the messenger between Claude Lanzmann and Steven Spielberg, which was a funny thing, because Lanzmann and Spielberg at some point, I think Lanzmann did criticize quite vehemently the list of Schindler's List, and so it was. It seemed that before Lanzmann died, at least I could at least contribute somewhat to the reconciliation, or at least to the communication between the two, and these two were really warm to each other. So at least it was an interesting episode, I would say.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
On that, I think, and it's did you consider any Holocaust movies you absolutely did not want Son of Saul to be like? And which ones did you draw on for positive inspiration?
Hold on, because I didn't catch the beginning of the question. I'm sorry, there was some cut out moment.
Should I read it again?
Yes, please.
And I've also sent it to you, so you can
Yeah.
look at it there. So,
Yeah, I can see it. I did consider a lot of movies that I didn't want my film to look like. Most of them, I didn't want my film to look like. For example, there was a movie about the Sonderkommandos that was called The Gray Zone. And I really did not want my film to look like that movie. Even if that movie was made with the best of intentions, I have no questions about it. But it achieved a very problematic outcome, I think, because of how you show directly the horror. I think you cannot show the horror directly. You have to have the filter of one individual. You have to use some kind of indirect way to make the horror felt rather than seen. And that was, I think that's the biggest problem with the whole so-called Holocaust movies.
the other part of the question was, were there any movies that you did draw on?
Shoah by Klansman and Come and See by Klimov, which is not directly a Holocaust movie, but it was our first visual reference. It's a Russian movie, Soviet film from 83, I guess, 84, about a kid on the Eastern Front and the massacres that the Nazis commit in Belarus, and so that was it's such a visceral experience that it's something that we kept in our head throughout the production as a sort of uncompromising attitude to what our depiction of the horror and our depiction, our approach to the extermination should be in a way. It doesn't mean that we actually use the same approach, but we were inspired by it, and it gave us a sort of model for the intense experience that the movie should be a movie on the Holocaust or on the cruelty on innocent people should be like, or should look like.
Great. Thank you. The next question, it's a bit longer, so I'm sending it to you also in the chat so you can read along. The idea of Saul searching for a rabbi to say Kaddish for the boy is such an interesting and powerful premise for a Holocaust film. How did you come up with this, and where did the inspiration come from? Was the child who died at the beginning Saul's actual son, or does he stand as the son of all men? In the film, the character of Abraham has an ambivalent relationship with Saul throughout the story, which is even briefly remarked upon in a piece of dialogue. Could you perhaps discuss how you think Abraham views Saul and what you wanted to express through their relationship?
Well, I'm always hesitant to give a sort of manual to my movies because it's I think it's not entirely my role, but I can help in a way. I really hope at some point in the process that the film becomes, independent, or at least starts having its own life. It has its own energy, and in this case, as for the inspirations, we did read. There's an account, a book by a Hungarian doctor who's a Hungarian Jew from Transylvania who came back, who was deported in 44 and came back in 45, and then wrote a book in 46, 47. His name was Miklós Nyszly, and he was actually one of the assistants of the German military doctor Mengele in Auschwitz, and because he was a doctor, and so he actually had a sort of first-hand account of the horrors of Auschwitz, and indirectly also touching on the history of the Sonderkommandos. And he actually, I think he was an inspiration in the refusal to make it look better or make it look less horrible than it was. And that was first inspiration. But he also, in one of the episodes, does talk about the surviving girl who survived the gas chamber, and then she was rescued and tried to be, the Sonderkommando members tried to rescue her, but the German officer eventually shot her. So that was actually I think the basis for the Gray Zone, the film that I mentioned earlier. But I didn't want something, I didn't want to create a story that would have this, in a way, this easily, the dramatic value of some kind of Hollywood story or the happy ending, or at least the kind of the kind of movie that would reduce the audience to weeping machines. So I didn't want to. I wanted to be much more, I wanted to stay much closer to the logic of reality in a concentration camp. So that really needed to go back to the original documents of the Sonderkommandos and to the historians that I believed were relevant in that sense, and to Shoah and the testimonies in Shoah, for example, and try to, it's almost archaeology, try to take away everything that was added during the post-war years and go back to the origin and try to find what were the emotions and the facts that were added later, and what were the original emotions and what were the original strata of reality. And that really needed a sort of set of antenna to feel the world. So as far as the relationships between the character, what we saw is that we did not want to create huge backstories. So we wanted to create, because there were early drafts, I have to say, that did include a lot of elements. People as Sonderkommando members talking in, they were living under the roof of this crematorium. So they had a possibility to speak. So why not speak? And we, in the process of development, we understood that it wasn't a club or something like that, a country club when you speak about your past experience. It's something much more, it's so repressed and it's so tense and based on the text again, that you cannot really, we understood that these people had no past. So create a backstory with a lot of ramifications created the problem of a sort of vision of after the Holocaust. And we really wanted to go back to the or at least approach the reality and the raw reality and the reality of simplicity in a way during the minutes and hours of the extermination process. So for that reason, I wouldn't say more about their relationship, but we do hint at a sort of that the fact that they come from the same place or at least know each other from before the war or in the process of deportation. But we didn't want to go deeper. We didn't want to give more to the audience. And I know that usually people are more accustomed to deeper and more complex backstories and interpersonal relationship, but this didn't sound realistic when it came to the Sonderkommandos.
The next question, sorry, is your first film seems, in inverted commas, intimist. Do you plan to make another film where the intimist style is discarded?
Well, it's subjective cinema, I would say, or if maybe that's another word for intimist. Well, maybe I can talk a little bit about subjective versus objective. I have to say that it seems that more and more films are represented and told in a fashion that's objective, or at least that has been the case for at least 30 years since the victory, in a way, of television over cinema, or at least the fact that the televised aesthetics and way of storytelling and the television compatible approach to films, all these trends have pushed the cinematic language and the cinematic exploration to the side, and to a sort of almost into a sort of very minute force of rebellion in the world of imagery and media today. So what I would say is that in the 80s and 90s, the fact that the broadcasters became, especially in Europe, but also, in other parts of the world, but very, very, I'm talking about Europe, I really know about it. The broadcasters became the governing force of film financing and filmmaking in Europe. And everybody thought it was beautiful that, television has money, so they should invest and they should support cinema. But it actually killed cinema, let's put it this way, because if you as a filmmaker submit your script and to a film fund, a regional fund, and the chances are that it has to be television compatible, meaning that all the information have to be repeated 5 times. It has to be lit in a certain way. It has to be understood very well throughout the end, so you can do something else during the experience of it. It has to be very objectively shown and not strange or questioning the language of cinema. So actually, what I would say is that we're now in a sort of in a sort of strange end of war situation with cinema. Is that it seems that it's less and less accepted to present a vision in film that's not about the subject, but about a treatment of the subject. It's not about a vision, but about an understandable story. And also because a story can be communicated very well in the media, so it's not only you're not looking for an experience, although I would say that the audience would look for experiences if they want to go to cinema. No, you're looking for, there's a sort of push to make it television compatible. And that's, I think, that's, it's strange to answer your question in that way, but it's linked because when you go for a subjective approach, for example, in my case, it's a way to look for subjective experience and how you find a cinematic language, and certainly have to question the codes of cinema. How many establishing shots you do, how many times the information is repeated. What is it more about the experience, or is it more about the story, or is it more about the plot elements that are safely navigating the audience, or is it more so it's a very, very central question, I think, to what cinema is. Is it adventurous, or is it just following the codes? And I would say that there has been shrinking in the codes of filmmaking since the advent of television.
The next question is, do you think you would have been able to tell that story if you had not been personally connected to it through the history of your family?
There was a drive in me to tell the story because I grew up in the trauma of the Holocaust. I mean, maybe too much, you might argue. And I would have preferred not to hear the stories on the Holocaust, I guess. But so it's my story is a sort of very classical Eastern European survivors, the generations of survivors transmitting the stories and the trauma of the Holocaust. So I grew up in it. I didn't choose, but maybe I was exposed very early on, and it was not a very good thing. But I made this movie because I felt that the visceral experience of the Holocaust has not been given to today's audiences, and the retelling of the Holocaust has not been done in a way, or if it was done by an industry only interested in other aspects that were not so, I think, about responsibility and representation. And so I think everybody can make a film about a Holocaust if they're, you don't have to. You have to be obsessed enough, I guess, about what you're doing, but there's no prerequisite as far as I'm concerned. If you're interested and obsessed, and you have something new to say.
The next question is, Claude Lanzmann said if he had found an archival film of people being gassed in the Holocaust, he would not have included it in his films and would even have destroyed it. Although we don't see people being gassed in the film, meaning your film, how did you address the dilemma of representing this aspect of the Holocaust?
Oh, wow. Well, my movie is in a way an answer to this. We don't show directly the horror. We use the filter of one human being who can be our channel to what's going on. The gas chambers are particular because if you try to reconstruct it in a very evident visual way, then you end up with hell on earth. But then it becomes, I think, sort of exploitation, and it becomes the voyeuristic, repressed joy of this, being the survivor, being able to watch this. And I think it has nothing to do with a responsible attitude, and it doesn't trigger the right responses. I think I'm not even talking about a moral point of view. I'm talking about how it does not make you grow as an individual. I think if you just are in for the imagery, And I think the whole adventure of Son of Saul was about this sense of responsibility. So it's hard to imagine anything else if you want to go, because it's so easy to go. And I mean, it's not easy to recreate the gas chambers, but it's easy to make images. So in a world where it's really easy, and even computers now help you, so you don't even need to be a filmmaker. You can only be, you can be a programmer or something else, a media artist, whatever, animator. So if you do this, then what kind of reaction do you want to produce in the audience? I think if you don't show, you create more. If you suggest something, you create more. And if the imagery in a way is born in the head of the viewer, then it becomes unlimited. It becomes infinite. It triggers a mechanism of projection that's much more valuable than mere imagery, which actually reduces the impact.
Thank you. Our next question is, in creating an immersive experience around Saul's point of view, were you in part inspired by video games?
That's funny. Especially in France, I did receive this kind of questions quite a lot. And I'm not saying that you're trying to, denigrate anything here, but there's a sort of critical approach in film theory, and some people, especially again in France, were very keen on using that analogy, that if you're thrown into a person's here and now, if you're behind them, then you're in a video game. I have to argue first that I was assistant to a Hungarian filmmaker called Béla, who did like this immersive filmmaking, and I was certainly impressed and interested in his filmmaking. There's a tradition of immersive cinema or long shots and being conscious that we are sharing time and space with the main character or characters. These are elements, and also the elements are that that in video games usually you don't really you see the background. You have a defocus lens, or at least something close to that, and in defocus photography you can see the background, and in my film you cannot see. But hey, I don't even mind that, so maybe, but I don't really understand really why people ask me this question, although I understand. But if it's only just a real genuine question, then I try to answer it right before. So
Great. Yeah, no, I think you answered it. Could you talk about the decisions you made in regards to the sound design in your film?
Yeah, the sound was very difficult because we didn't have a lot of direct sound coming from the shoot. We had to recreate so many layers. So actually, my sound designer actually teaches a class based on the sound design of Son of Saul, and he shows the audience all the layers of sound that exist in the movie. And what we wanted to achieve is the following: if you limit the visual the visual possibilities and perspective of the viewer, then you might want to open up the auditive the soundscape of the film, because the sound is here always indicates, the sound always indicates there's much more than just the imagery. It's a world, but you cannot have a full access to this world. But sound is always there. It's more abstract or very concrete, but also creates a more mental world, universe. And it's also there as a reference point that this world has so many layers. You cannot access it fully in a visual sense, but you can access it through other senses, and maybe not only the auditive sense, but also through your mind in a way. So that really invites the audience to open I think the mental capacities, or try to open up the frequencies when it comes to this experience. So it was a very tedious, long process, and we have like 8 languages in the movie, which is not obviously evident for everybody, but we had a lot of languages, from Yiddish to Hungarian to German to Greek and so on and so forth, and we tried to represent the sort of Babel of languages that was that existed in the Holocaust, and for people from all over Europe being deported to this place that they had no knowledge of beforehand. So it's actually this sense of being lost, of being alone, of being vulnerable. All the visceral elements were linked to, or we try to create a more a better sense of this through sound, and the fact that that it had to be complex. At some point we tried to limit, because we did put too much. So we did, my sound designer said, okay, we're doing too much. So we really have to orient the viewer in a way. So it's a very complex soundscape, but then in a way you create a sort of invisible focal points on sound that really, I think, helps to navigate the attention in a way in this craziness, this labyrinth. And I think the labyrinth is a good defining word for the film.
Thank you. I'm mindful that we don't have very much time left for this session, so maybe I'll summarize the last few questions, and then you could see in what detail you wanted to respond to these. One question was that several people have asked along the lines of, why do you think Germany, or Germans in particular, questioned or did not like or appreciate your artistic perspective? Another question was, where next for filmmakers looking at the Holocaust? And perhaps related to that, would you ever make a film like Son of Saul, but about a woman's experience?
So, well, many questions there. The first one was about. Can you remind me of the first one, because it just took me into so many directions now. If you can send it to me, maybe.
Yes. Why the Germans in particular?
Yeah, the Germans.
Style.
Well, I could talk about it for hours, but I will not probably. But what I can say is that it was staggering to see, in a way, the resistance, the lack of interest, the attack in the newspapers. Not all of them, but a lot. Some of them extremely questionable intent. For example, when one of the major newspapers, published an article saying that we are doing Holocaust porn, and we are actually have no sense of responsibility. We're actually offending the memory of the victims. obviously I'm a filmmaker, so it's it's not to me to say anything about it, but I would say that I think much more people saw this movie in Taiwan, in Japan and South Korea and all these countries, or that have no direct link to the Holocaust or direct understanding specifically of the Holocaust in Germany. And okay, maybe I understand why, because it's not the usual clear-cut moral rearrangement of responsibilities, what I was referring to earlier. You don't have the good German and the bad Germans. You don't have this kind of moral guidelines for the audience. You're in the visceral hell of what people created. And so the sense of guilt, I can understand it, is extremely high when it comes to Germany, when you and especially because in the last 30 years, I would say that Germany's film industry has been very keen on reorienting the role of German in the Holocaust, and creating the narrative of the German resistant, and so we have so many films regarding this this new viewpoint, and anything that's not compatible with this viewpoint, I think it's problematic. So they will try to suppress it. So I have no kind words to say on that matter. I have to say I'm not really. I would say things that are more more hurtful. So I will stop there. But I have to say I was very, very disappointed in what was going on the distribution side in Germany and in Austria. But that's not. Interestingly, Israel didn't respond very well to the movie either, in a way. But I would say that I think it triggers so much emotion that I understand that survivors don't want to see it. And it's interesting also that in Hungary, for example, a lot of people in the Jewish community did not go to see the movie because they were scared of it. So that's a different thing, and I understand why people would not who were touched in their very essence by the Holocaust would not like to see it, and I'm not advising them to see it. Actually, one of the last surviving members of the Sonderkommando, who was living in, who is not dead now, but who was living in Los Angeles, a Greek Jew, an incredibly warm-hearted man. He wanted to see the movie, and he did see the movie, and he responded to it very, very well. I think he was shaken. I think he kept it a little bit in the distance, but he did in a way feel, or at least that's what he communicated, that this was a truthful experience. Obviously, I think that it was not 1% of what he had to go through, or 0.1%, but at least it's you can never reach that level. So that's something that I can say. And for what was the other question?
I'm going to suggest maybe that we can take these into the masterclass.
Okay.
The last two questions were on where next for Holocaust film, and whether you would make a film with a woman, a Holocaust film like Son of Saul, with a woman in the lead role.
I did a film about a young woman called Sunset, and that's about the downfall of the European civilization. So I guess I did answer this question, but we can talk about it more maybe tomorrow if there's more need for that.
Yes. I mean, in fact, I'm very much looking forward to the masterclass tomorrow for Manchester staff and students at 2 p.m. on Zoom. And if you are not registered yet, you can still do so on the Center for Jewish Studies website, where tomorrow László will talk about the connections between his two films, Son of Saul and Sunset, and about the film industry more generally. And it could also be a time to find out more about the film industry in times of COVID. Thank you very much, László, for your profound insights and elaborations of film in the face of historical crisis. That's also the title of the masterclass tomorrow, to lead over into that. And thank you to Lem for being here today with us. And at the end, I'd like to hand back to you, Lem, actually, to wrap up the event.
Okay, thank you. László, I'm now going to speak for about half an hour about what I felt about. No, I'm not. I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for speaking with such openness and integrity. And that integrity and openness is reflected directly in the attention to detail of your film, The Son of Saul. And thank you for making it, and thank you for being here and being so open to everybody today.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Having me. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thanks very much, László and Lem, and thanks to the audience, to everyone who came along tonight. And see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.